Prince Idris was the most admired young man in the entire kingdom of Zahir. At 27 years old, he was known for his charm, intelligence, and unmatched confidence. As the first son of King Abdul, he was expected to follow royal traditions and obey his father's wishes. However, Idris was not the type to follow rules blindly. He had his own desires, his own expectations, and above all, his own conditions when it came to choosing a wife. Unlike his father, who believed in tradition, Idris was a man who followed his heart. He was selective in everything: his food, his clothing, his friends, and especially the woman he would marry. He believed that if he was going to spend the rest of his life with a woman, she had to be special. Not just any lady could stand beside him as queen. His father, King Abdul, had been patient with his stubbornness for years. But now, time was running out. The king was growing older, and the kingdom needed a future queen. One evening, as the sun set over the palace, the king called his son into the royal chamber. "Idris, you are no longer a boy. It is time you choose a wife," the king said in a firm tone. Idris smirked. "Father, I will marry, but only when I find the right woman." The king frowned. "And what exactly is the right woman to you?" "Father, she must fit my shoe size perfectly. Not just any woman will do. Her feet must slide into my shoes as if they were made for her." The king raised an eyebrow. "Your shoe size? That is your condition?" Idris nodded. "And that is not all. She must also pamper me like a baby, give me the care and attention I deserve. She must always make me happy, satisfy me in every way, and never complain." The king sighed deeply. "These are childish demands, Idris. A marriage is built on respect, understanding, and partnership. Not just on comfort and pleasure." But Idris was unmoved. He had made up his mind. "I will not change my conditions, father. If a woman cannot meet them, then she is not meant to be my wife." His eldest sister, Princess Zara, who was 32 years old, had been listening quietly. She shook her head in disappointment. "You are acting like a spoiled child, Idris. Marriage is not about finding a servant, it is about finding a partner." Idris chuckled. "Then I suppose I will wait for the woman who meets my standards." The king, knowing how stubborn his son was, decided to let him face the reality of his own decisions. "Very well. I will not force you. But let us see if there is a woman in this kingdom who will accept such conditions." Days turned into weeks, and the news of Prince Idris's peculiar marriage conditions spread across the kingdom like wildfire. Women from noble and common backgrounds alike were intrigued. Some admired his confidence, while others found his demands ridiculous. Still, many young women came forward, eager to prove themselves worthy of becoming the future queen. The palace was soon flooded with ladies who wished to try on the prince's shoes. The first lady, Lady Aisha, a graceful woman from a respected noble family, confidently stepped forward. The court gathered as she placed her foot inside the prince's shoe. She smiled at first, but soon, a look of discomfort crossed her face. The shoe was too tight. She forced a small laugh, trying to hide her embarrassment, but Idris simply shook his head. "You do not fit," he said calmly. Next. The second lady, a merchant's daughter named Zainab, had slightly larger feet. The moment she tried to fit into the prince's shoe, she struggled. Idris sighed. "This will not do," he said, turning away. One by one, women came and left, but none could meet the prince's condition. Some left in disappointment, others in frustration. His sister, Princess Zara, watched the spectacle in disbelief. "This is foolishness, Idris," she said. "Do you really think love is measured by shoe size?" But Idris was unbothered. "A woman destined to be with me will fit perfectly. It is a sign from the universe." After days of failed attempts, the king himself grew weary. "Enough of this madness, Idris. You will not find a wife this way." Idris smirked. Then let me search my own way." With that, he left the palace, determined to find the woman who would not only fit his shoes but also his heart. He visited villages, marketplaces, and gatherings, but no one could fit his shoes. Some ladies tried to force their feet in, while others laughed at his request. One day, he arrived at a small village where he met a young woman named Amira. She was not dressed in fine clothes like the noblewomen he had seen before. Instead, she wore a simple gown, and her hands were rough from hard work. Yet, there was something about her presence that caught his attention. Amira stood before him, curious about his visit. The villagers had told her about the prince's unusual search, but she had never thought much about it. "You wish for a woman to fit into your shoes?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Idris nodded. "Yes. And not only that, but she must pamper me like a baby and always satisfy me." Amira let out a small laugh. "A grown man like you, wanting to be pampered like a child?" Idris smirked. "It is what I desire." She glanced at the shoes he held in his hands. They were finely made, much different from the worn-out sandals she wore. "Very well," she said. "I will try." She slipped her foot into the shoe, and to Idris' surprise, it fit perfectly. For a moment, he was speechless. He had not expected to find a match in a place like this. The villagers gasped in amazement, and murmurs filled the air. "She fits. She fits," they whispered among themselves. Idris looked at Amira with curiosity. "You fit into my shoes, but do you meet my other conditions?" Amira crossed her arms. "And what do I get in return for treating you like a baby and satisfying your every need?" Idris was taken aback by her question. No woman had dared to question his demands before. They had all either tried and failed or simply walked away. "If you are to be my wife, you will have a life of luxury. You will live in the palace, wear the finest clothes, and never know hardship again," he answered confidently. Amira shook her head. "I do not seek riches, Prince Idris. I seek a husband who will respect me, just as I respect him. A marriage is not about one person serving the other, it is about balance." Idris frowned. He had expected her to be happy that she fit his shoes. He had assumed she would do whatever it took to be his bride. But she was different. "Are you saying you refuse?" he asked. Amira smiled. "I am saying that if you want a queen, you must act like a king, not a child who demands to be pampered." The crowd fell silent. No one had ever spoken to the prince this way. Even the noblewomen had always obeyed him without question. Idris stared at Amira for a long moment. For the first time, he felt challenged. Prince Idris had never been questioned like this before. He was always admired, respected, and obeyed without hesitation. Yet, here stood a simple village woman, speaking to him as though he were an ordinary man. "You are bold," he said. "Most women would consider it an honor to marry me." Amira remained calm. "An honor is only valuable if it comes with dignity. I do not wish to live in a palace as a servant to my husband. If I marry, it will be as an equal partner, not as someone who is expected to fulfill unreasonable demands." The villagers, still watching in silence, waited for the prince's reaction. Idris had always been known for his stubbornness, and many expected him to walk away, insulted by Amira's words. But instead, he found himself intrigued. For years, he had believed that a woman should simply accept his terms. He had assumed that marriage was about his own comfort, his own satisfaction. Yet, for the first time, he was forced to consider another perspective. "You speak with wisdom," Idris admitted. "But tell me, if a man is to be king, should his wife not devote herself to making him happy?" Amira shook her head. "A wise king does not demand devotion, he earns it. If a husband is kind, loving, and respectful, his wife will naturally want to make him happy. She will care for him not because he commands it, but because she loves him." The prince fell silent. No one had ever explained it to him this way. His father had taught him about power and leadership, but never about love and partnership. After a moment, he said, "You have given me much to think about, Amira. I will not force you to marry me. But I will ask you this: do you believe I am capable of change?" Amira smiled softly. "Only you can answer that, Prince Idris. A man who refuses to change remains trapped in his own pride. But a man who learns and grows will become a true king." Idris took a deep breath. He had come here searching for a woman who fit his shoes, but instead, he had found something far more valuable: wisdom. For the first time in his life, he questioned whether his demands had been fair. He realized that finding a wife was not about control, but about building a future together. He turned to the villagers and declared, "I have learned something today. A queen is not chosen by the size of her feet, but by the strength of her heart and mind. I will not search for a woman to serve me, I will search for a woman to stand beside me." Prince Idris spent more time in the small town, observing how Amira lived among the people. She was not just kind in words but also in actions. She treated the poor with the same respect as the rich, and she never hesitated to help those in need. One day, as they sat by a riverbank, Idris turned to her and spoke sincerely. "Amira, I have seen many places and met many people. But none have affected me the way you have. You have taught me a lesson I never expected to learn." She looked at him with curiosity. "And what lesson is that?" "That true strength is not in power but in understanding. That leadership is not about commanding people but serving them," he said. "And most importantly, that love is not about making demands but about finding someone who truly completes you." Amira smiled but did not respond immediately. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "Prince Idris, I am glad you have changed. But do you truly understand what love means? It is not just about admiration, it is about sacrifice, patience, and commitment." Idris nodded. "I understand that now. And that is why I have decided to return home not just as a changed man but as a man ready to rule wisely. But before I go, I must ask, would you consider standing beside me as my queen?" Amira was silent for a moment. She had never dreamed of being a queen. Her life had always been simple, and she was content with it. But as she looked into Idris's eyes, she saw sincerity, not just in his words but in his heart. "I will not say yes easily," she finally said. "If you truly want me to be your wife, then you must prove that your change is not temporary." Idris smiled. "Then let me prove it." He returned to his kingdom and stood before his father, the great King Abdul. The entire court was present, waiting to hear what the prince would say. "My father," Idris began, "I have returned not just as a prince but as a man who understands his duty. I now see that leadership is not about being served but about serving others. I was wrong to set foolish conditions for my wife. A true queen is not chosen by her ability to fit into my shoes but by the strength of her character and the kindness of her heart." The king, who had doubted his son for years, finally smiled with pride. "Then you have truly become a man fit to be king." The news of Idris's transformation spread across the kingdom. Many noble women came forward, hoping to be chosen as his bride. But Idris had already made his decision. He returned to Amira's village, this time with royal guards and messengers. He stood before her with a humble heart. "Amira, I have proven myself before my people. Now, I ask you once again, will you be my queen?" This time, Amira saw not just a prince but a man who had learned the true meaning of love and leadership. With a gentle smile, she nodded. "Yes, I will." The entire kingdom celebrated their union, for they knew that under their rule, Zahir would be a kingdom of wisdom and fairness. But this was not the end of their journey, it was only the beginning. The royal wedding was the grandest event the kingdom had seen in years. People from all regions gathered to witness the union of Prince Idris and Amira. The palace was decorated with golden ornaments, and the sound of drums echoed across the land. Amira, now dressed as a bride, was admired by all. Her beauty was not just in her appearance but in the kindness that shone through her eyes. As she walked down the grand hall, escorted by the elder women of her village, everyone whispered about how fortunate the prince was to have found such a rare woman. When she finally stood before Idris, the ceremony began. The king himself presided over the wedding, his voice filled with pride. Today, we do not just celebrate a marriage. We celebrate the transformation of a prince into a man worthy of ruling. Idris held Amira's hands gently. I once believed love was about personal satisfaction, he said in front of the crowd. But now, I understand that love is about trust, sacrifice, and true companionship. Amira smiled softly. And I promise to stand by your side, not as a servant, but as your equal, your partner in all things. The vows were made, and the ceremony ended with the grand feast. The entire kingdom rejoiced, and for the first time, King Abdul felt peace in his heart. His son had finally matured. From that day forward, Amira was respected not just as the prince's wife, but as a future queen who would stand beside her husband in ruling the kingdom. Years passed, and when the time came, King Abdul died, and Idris was crowned the king. And Amira as the princess, Idris ruled the kingdom with wisdom, fairness, and strength. The people of Zahir spoke of their king and queen with admiration. They were not just rulers. They were the heart of the kingdom. Idris had once thought that a wife was meant to serve him, to meet his every demand. But life had taught him a greater lesson that true love and leadership were not about control, but about respect, understanding, and shared purpose. And so, under their rule, the kingdom of Zahir flourished, remembered for generations as the golden era of wisdom and unity.